And you're going to therefore see not only having more women, but when you have more women, you're going to start to see, and already are seeing, women then are able to then lead us who they are. And their natural instincts, and this is not me, but research is showing, what comes naturally to women is actually what works. That's the kind of leadership that we need today, that embodies compassion, caring, etc., alongside strength and focus and courage and resilience. We need a blend of those masculine, good, positive, mature masculine qualities with mature feminine.
Hello and welcome to the Mindful Entrepreneur Podcast. We're your hosts, Tati and Gerry Jimenez.
Join us as entrepreneurs and brother and sister interview inspiring leaders in different fields to explore how they've achieved results and fulfillment. Let's get started as soul, passion, and business come together at The Mindful Entrepreneur. Last episode, we spoke with Raj Sisodia, the co-founder and co-chairman of the movement Conscious Capitalism. We talked about how amidst tragic events, unifying moments can emerge from great leadership. Today, we'll delve deeper into what it takes to become a conscious leader, how conscious companies outperform their competitors 9-1, and what the silent revolution is that's taking place.
I like to read a portion of Shaki leadership that we found very relevant to current times. And it says, the only hope for the future is the change of man's consciousness, and it's bound to come. But it is up to men to decide if they want to collaborate with it, or if it will have to be forced upon them by crashing circumstances. And then it invites us to wake up and collaborate. And we love this, Raj, because the Mindful Entrepreneur is the result of an intentional collaboration between the masculine and the feminine, Tati and myself, and business and inner conscious work. Can you talk to us about how you see businesses, entrepreneurs, and people profiting from proactively collaborating with one another?
Well, that's what it's all about. I mean, a business, the reason it's a business is it's not something one person can do. So it's something that people are coming together in order to achieve something that you cannot achieve individually. And that has to be rooted in some kind of a higher purpose, something that will inspire and attract people. See, business should not, going to work for a business should not just be a transaction that my body shows up here and my physical ability. I mean, that's almost, maybe this is an extreme metaphor, but it's kind of a form of prostitution when work has no meaning beyond just, your paycheck, right? It's like I'm renting out my body for these hours.
Right.
And maybe that's not a good metaphor, but, truly having a reason why you want to be part of something, having a passion for that, it makes you come alive. It makes you feel that you are fully engaged and you're in flow and you're sharing the gifts that you were born with. And this is what you were meant to do. If we can find people for whom that kind of condition exists at work, it's not just a job, it's not a career, it's a calling. I was born to do this. If we can attract people like that, it's extraordinary, because the power that we have within us is incredible. And for the most part, it never comes out because we're doing things that we're not really fully engaged in or committed to. But if we can do that, if we can find people for whom this work is truly meaningful and create the conditions where they have respect and dignity and empowerment, and they're doing something meaningful, then the extraordinary things will happen. So I think that's the only way. Ultimately, every organization on this planet runs on human energy. And even though we might be using, engines and machines, I'm not talking about physical energy. I'm talking about the creative, caring energy of human beings. And to the extent that you're able to elicit and harness and channel that human energy, you will succeed more or less. And these organizations, if you think about it, worldwide employee engagement is 13%, 1-3. And engagement is not passion. Engagement just means I care about my job, more than just showing up and doing the bare minimum. So when you've got 13% engagement versus some conscious companies are at 90% passionate commitment, the difference is extraordinary. I mean, it's more than 10-1, right? One person can have the impact of 10,000 people. It's not just about the numbers, right?
Yeah.
Human beings, it's not horsepower, okay, that you put more horses. One human being can do something that even 1,000 couldn't do, because more and more of what we need to do comes out of here, right? And it's creative and it's outside the box, and that you cannot force people to be creative and caring. You can only inspire them.
How do you think a conscious leader would have handled what happened in Charlottesville?
Well, I can just think how President Obama would have handled it. I mean,
Yeah.
you can just see what he did in South Carolina, right? You take a tragedy and you use it as a way to bring people together. You use it as a way to reconnect people to their higher angels. Leaders make so much difference in where we end up as human beings. So, there's a dark side within us and there's a light side. The line between the dark and the light is very thin between human beings. The same human being is capable of being extraordinarily caring and considerate, right, and self-sacrificing and altruistic when inspired by a certain leader, right, and put in a certain set of circumstances. And that same person can also do unspeakably horrible things to other people. Now, there have been experiments that were done, for example, Milgram's experiments in Yale in 1962, the Milgram experiments, where ordinary people were brought in and basically they were able to get 2/3 of them, 705 people were in those experiments. 2/3 or 67% of them were willing to apply electric shock to somebody sitting across on the other side of a one-way mirror, in order to get them to learn some basic things. And every time they made a mistake, and the experimenters told them, every time they make a mistake, give them a shock, and it goes up and up from 15 volts to 450 volts, which would kill them. And they did that. 2/3 of them did it. And these were not evil people. They were ordinary citizens of New Haven, Connecticut. But they were given permission and they were told, this is your job. And you're not to blame if something happens, right? And 1/3 of them did refuse to do it at some point and they walked out. But the fact is 2/3 did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what he calls an agentic state. People get into an agent. Most people do not have the inner resources to resist a malevolent authority. And what we need to do is therefore build those resources in people through education, through consciousness, through awareness, right? But again, and that's a slow process, and it's not going to achieve 100%. But beyond that, recognize that those same people, if that experiment had been designed differently and they were there to do something good for the person across, and they were given encouragement and the tools to do so, they would have done that, right? So the leadership makes all the difference. Leaders can steer the same people. I mean, the reason Milgram did this was his parents were Holocaust survivors, and his question was, what makes ordinary human beings do these unspeakably horrible things to each other?
Right.
And it comes down to leadership and people being in this agentic state, which is, well, it's just my job, I'm just following orders. They suspend moral judgment, right? Because they know somebody else is taking responsibility. They're not responsible for their own actions. So organizations have plenty of people who are in an agentic state, who hide behind rules, who suspend basic humanity. Right? So we need to create organizations where, this is in my new book, The Healing Organization that we're talking about, the leader has a great deal of significance because they can create a healing organization or a hurting organization, depending on what they're putting out. Their consciousness will define the consciousness of the organization. And the same people, it's not that you need to fire bad people and hire good people. Everybody, most people, unless you're sociopathic or psychopathic, and that's a percentage, small percentage. Most people are capable of being inspired to do wonderful things, and that it's really based on fear that people then go down to those levels. So as my friend Jane Dutton at University of Michigan has said, organizations can amplify or they can diminish our capacity for caring. We have a great capacity for caring. An organization can make me 100 times more effective at that. Or they can also make me do 100 times more harm than I'm capable of on my own. So leadership matters a great deal. The culture matters a great deal in that regard.
Great.
I remember you mentioned in your talk recently that the only, and I'm going to misquote you, but basically the only natural state of organizations is chaos.
Yeah, well, it was actually Peter Drucker's quote, who says, yeah, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Only 3 things happen naturally: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. So you can put, brilliant people who are well-intentioned together, and unless somebody steps into the role of leader and takes on that responsibility, you will find friction, confusion, and underperformance. So leadership matters a great deal, even in today's world where people are intelligent, they are educated, they are conscious, they are informed, they are connected. We have all these things. Human beings are extraordinarily powerful today, but that doesn't mean we don't need leadership. We still need leadership. Leaders of countries matter a great deal.
And I also, with what you were saying in terms of it's a great responsibility to step into our leadership, especially for that led us into a question that in a way you already answered, which was geared toward the entrepreneur, the solopreneur, and it was more like, why aren't more people collaborating, and instead they're competing, where collaboration, it's so profitable and just what makes sense. How come more people aren't doing it? And so in a way you answered that, but it also...
Well, I would actually elaborate on that a little bit because, if you think about competition is an inherent quality in a capitalist system, and it's definitely one of the strong elements, because with competition comes improvement and elevation and so forth. But like any good thing, it can be taken too far, right? So if you only become about competition, and actually goes back further to the whole metaphor that we use for business, where a lot of the language and the way of organizing and the way of leading and the way of motivating in the world of business comes from the military. So in the 19th century, the only large entities, organizations that existed were armies. And when companies started becoming larger and they needed to figure out how do we manage on this scale, they looked to the military in terms of the command and control, the hierarchy, and eventually the language around strategy and operations and tactics and headquarters and the front lines. All of those are military terms, and we use them now commonly in business, where most people don't even know that they're military terms. But the mindset is there. And in the military, the competition is the enemy. Competitors are your enemy to be vanquished, right? And your customers are like the territory. You're trying to capture territory and kill your enemies. So in business, what do we say? We're trying to capture market share, right? We're trying to destroy our competitors. Mm-hmm. And it's not a very productive, think about war is a lose-lose game. It's not even a win-lose game, right? Ultimately, the best war is that which you avoid. Right. There's tremendous loss on both sides, and no war is final. Most wars plant seeds for the next war. Like in Europe, they had 1,200 wars in 600 years, until 1946, right? No war ever solved anything. Business is not war, right? When you say business is not a machine, business is not a game. It's not a math problem. Business is about human lives, right? And as Herb Keller said, the business of business is people. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We have to put people at the center. And what that means, you think differently about competitors. Yes, competitors are your rivals. They're not your enemies. They're your rivals in creating more and more value for employees, for customers, for shareholders. And you learn from them and you grow, right? So that's, the idea of noble competitors. You don't want to vanquish them. You actually want to learn, and you make each other better all the time, right? You challenge each other.
Love it. And I also love the part about when you were talking about when people treat business as war. And sometimes, what came forward was it's better sometimes not to show up to a war when a war is called. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we have a copycat business, at times it's just better to let whatever happened go and move forward.
Yes. So it's not about competitors. It's about serving customers better and better and giving more and more meaning to the lives of your employees. So don't worry so much about what the competition is doing. Focus on what you're doing and how you can do it better, right? And that's a game that adds value. If you just focus on trying to always do one better than your competitors, you may lose sight of the customers. You're fighting your battle with your competitor. Meanwhile, customer wants something entirely different. Right.
I think it was also resonates with what was said in terms of endearment, where you mentioned that how world-class companies can profit from passion and purpose and pursuing that conscious approach that you just mentioned. And I guess the little guys can benefit from that too as well. So.
Well, yeah. So what we found there was that these companies, which we picked on the basis of these four dimensions that we talked about: purpose, stakeholder orientation, leadership, and culture. We did the financial analysis at the end fully expecting to find that because they're paying their people much better, and in some cases double, and better healthcare benefits, and they're investing in customer care, and they're paying their suppliers better, and they're investing in their communities and in the environment and paying taxes at a higher rate, we thought maybe financial returns might be modest. We still thought they would be good because they're fundamentally good businesses, but we didn't expect them to be exceptional because these are not companies that are trying to maximize shareholder value or maximize profits. They're trying to create value for everybody. What we actually found was that they created much more financial value, and outperforming the market 9-1 over a 10-year period.
Wow.
And initially we thought this is a fluke, or maybe we made a mistake. We reanalyzed the data, we found out it's true. And then we dig into a little bit to understand why and how is that possible. And then you start to understand where that's happening, because these companies don't have to spend that much money on marketing because they get the benefit of free marketing. Some of them spend 90% less, some of them spend 99% less than the industry average. They have very low employee turnover. Costco is 7%, Walmart is 70%. So think about what that means in terms of people that you have to hire and train, and the lost productivity and all of that. They have lower legal costs. They don't need many layers of management. Right? They have more sales intensity per square foot. Their sales are growing fast. So they are spending money where it makes a difference, and they're not wasting money. Right. In areas like employee turnover and or lots of ads and coupons and sales and gimmicks all the time. And ultimately positive word of mouth, especially in today's world, with connectivity and with internet, the good and bad news spreads, and people know, where they should go and where they should not go. I'm watching right now, in the world of these ride share, Uber versus Lyft. Uber had a tremendous head start and a huge financial advantage. And they had a 90% market share a year ago, and Lyft was way behind. This now is 75-25. Uber is not a very conscious company. They're not very good to their drivers, and they're not very good to their customers, and they have antagonistic relationships with cities and and even countries, right? And whereas Lyft is trying to be a much more conscious company, treat their drivers well, create nice conditions for employees, be cooperative, recognize that taxi cabs are losing, in this process. So how do we manage this transition? So again, in the long run, the conscious approach will win out, because if I have a choice, I'm not going to go to Uber, I'll go to Lyft, right? Once I know about it, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, and it's a great example of what you were referring to before, of looking at your competitors and learning from them. So
yes, not attacking them, but learning from their mistakes, right? And doing better.
Yeah, thank you.
So Raj, one of the things we love about Shakti leadership, it's that it invites the feminine energy to be more present. So one of the things that we loved, it said, we're not done making radical changes. There are a lot more still to come. The 19th century marked the end of slavery, the 20th, the end of totalitarianism, and the 21st century, the end of relegating women and feminine values to second-class status. That is so powerful. How do you see this taking place?
Well, it already is taking place. I mean, this is the silent revolution that's been going on. And a big enabler is education. Higher education, access to higher education is a relatively recent phenomenon. Very few people used to go to college, and now it's a much higher percentage. 100 years ago, it was only 9% of people who even finished high school in this country. And only 25% went to college after that, from those who did finish high school. And most of those were men. And the few women who went, most of them went to education and nursing. And the reality today is so different. Close to 60% of women. First of all, 90% graduating high school, almost half going to college, in many countries much more than that. And of those who are going to college, almost 60% are women, and that's across all disciplines, especially professional schools. And women are graduating at a higher rate and getting better grades. And therefore, any occupation that requires higher education, and more occupations now do, right, will be beneficial for women. And we will start to see women numerically dominate those professions, anything white collar, as we call it, right? And those are the more significant things. And so, those are the things that make society really run. Everything else is more commodity. So women are already the majority in many of those professions, and will soon be also well represented in the leadership. There's a lag effect. 20 years ago, there was only one woman running a Fortune 500 company. Now there are 25. I have no doubt that in a decade, there'll be 50. right? And it'll go up rapidly from there, and board members and senior executives likewise. And you're going to therefore see not only having more women, but when you have more women, you're going to start to see, and already are seeing, women then are able to then lead us who they are. And their natural instincts, and this is not me, but research is showing, what comes naturally to women is actually what works. That's the kind of leadership that we need today, that embodies compassion, caring, etc., alongside strength and focus and courage and resilience. We need a blend of those masculine, good, positive, mature masculine qualities with mature feminine. And many women do that naturally. Women have higher emotional intelligence as a starting point, to start out with. And you can speculate as to why all these things are, but they are. The data is showing that. So we are starting to see that women are now able to show up not as men in women's clothing, which is what they had to be in the past. They had to be tougher and more ruthless and more aggressive than the most tough man in order to make it. So we had the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher and Golda Meir and Indira Gandhi. Those were the leaders we saw. And even historically, women were warriors, and a few of them that made it through. But now women can show up more authentically, and it also gives men permission to also be caring, be compassionate, be nurturing, right? So our male leaders in conscious capitalism will talk openly about bringing love into the workplace. John Mackey talks about that all the time. Ron Chekhov Panera, Kip Tyndall of the Container Store. I mean, the best example is Herb Kelleher of Southwest Airlines. He's been doing it for a longer time, right? I mean, their stock market symbol is love. And he embodies the wise fool of tough love. He's hilarious, playful. He's also brilliant and wise. He is extremely tough. He fought to change that whole industry where it was a lot of crony capitalism that was preventing new entrants. Mm-hmm. Right? And as I said, rooted in love. So we're starting to see that blend. And think about it. We were being asked not to be fully human for all these thousands of years. And it's deeply damaging to our psyches to deny half of that, right? For little boys to be told, man up, be a man, don't cry, right? Where you might be in pain. So it's a natural way to release that. That creates a wound, okay? And we have a lot of wounded inner child, running around in men, and that shows up as violence and aggression later in life. So wounded inner child inside the man. Okay, we can psychoanalyze President Trump if you want to. That's what you're seeing. Okay, there's a wounded inner child in there. This century, to me, is extraordinary, and this change is bigger, I think, than any of those changes, because this is half of humanity, right? And it is our more human half. These are those other qualities exist in other species, but these qualities are more deeply developed in human beings. Nurturing, caring, compassion, etc. But we have suppressed them for too long.
Agreed. And it's so important to have, like you said, the wholeness be owned by both men and women, and our masculine and feminine, both aspects of ourselves. So that's really beautiful. How can men and women help birth this type of feminine leadership?
Well, again, it's a blend of masculine and feminine. So we don't want to go too far to say we discard all the masculine, right? Because see, there's mature masculine and then there's hyper masculine. What we have seen historically is hyper masculine. Domination, aggression, ambition, winning, results at all costs, everything is a battle, everything is war, short-term thinking, win, lose. But then there's the beautiful mature masculine, which is strength, courage, resilience, focus, determination, right? Stillness. I mean, these are so-called mature masculine. We need those, okay? Because if you become only purely feminine, then you're not going to be able to realize the potential that exists in many situations, right? So we need to figure out, and even within the feminine, we have the mature feminine, which with some of the things we've been talking about, but there's also the hyper feminine, right? And we can get sentimental, we can get needy, right? We can get dependent and things like that. Again, it can,
manipulative.
It can happen to men and women. So we need to stay in that upper level, right? It's like the better angel. So in the book, as you might recall, we have that polarity mapping, right? And how do you cycle between those the mature masculine, mature feminine? It's like breathing in and breathing out. And when you start to fall into the lower quadrants, when you start getting into the hyper feminine, for example, then you need to dial up your mature masculine. that brings you back up. And there are ways to cultivate those things. We have some exercises in the book about how do you figure out what is your default state, and then how do you cultivate the other side, that the complementary side that you need.
And we'll include links on the blog post for this podcast with all the books that we've mentioned here, Raj. So this is really beautiful and inspiring, and so refreshing to be able to speak about love and collaboration in a way where it's serious, where the best of the best in the world in business have actually proved that it works. People like yourself, scholars, and people that are in business like yourself as well, that have studied this and are putting it out into the world. So we're so grateful, excited, inspired to keep this moving forward. And we wanted to thank you for joining us today and for your time.
You're welcome. I do think it's, even for me personally, it's a big relief to know that you can be in the world of business and succeed without having to be this other being, right? Putting on this mask and this armor and going to battle. It's like taking off a pair of tight shoes. You can just relax.
Yeah. I agree.
There's an ease and a comfort to this, and I think we need that. Okay.
Hey, and before you leave, both the Genius Spot and Be the Factor want to thank you, our awesome audience, for being part of our podcast. And if you found this episode of value, please share it with your friends and loved ones so they too can join the Mindful Entrepreneur.